Hello and welcome to Business Sense. I'm Ralph Rivas. For today's episode, we have here in the Rappler studio the CEO of Blue Float Energy, Carlos Martin. Blue Float is set to build some offshore wind projects in the Philippines. We're already familiar with the windmills in the mountains. Well, Blue Float basically wants to install them on the sea. Carlos, why the Philippines?
First of all, thanks for having us here. It's a pleasure being here and sharing our plans for the Philippines. So, Philippines is a very important market for Blue Float Energy. We are a global company dedicated exclusively to offshore wind development, and we have been working in the Philippines for more than 2 years. From the beginning, we believe that the potential for this country is huge, and also that offshore wind can be a force for development, economic and social development in the country.
So we basically haven't seen any offshore wind projects so far, and you're set to build them. Help us imagine what would it look like, how long will that take, all the details basically.
The whole concept is relatively simple. You talk about those windmills that we are relatively used to see inland. Well, this is a similar type of turbine, bigger, which is located at sea. So the whole concept is relatively simple. Now, all the work and the technology behind that is much more complex, not so simple. First of all, the development time for offshore wind farms is longer than onshore. And that's because at sea, you take more time to characterize the area, to measure wind. We always take environmental protection as one of the key priorities. That means conducting long environmental surveys, understanding any risk, and proposing mitigation measures for any of those risks. From an engineering point of view, it also takes significant time to, based on the site characterization, define the layout of the project, designing the foundations, procuring all the equipment, financing the project, and constructing it. So if an onshore wind farm can take 2-3 years between the early development and the execution, in offshore wind we're talking about somewhere between 5 and 8 years, typically.
5 to 8 years. Wow, that takes a lot of patience. So which areas are you looking at so far? And the capacity?
We're looking into areas, of course, where there is wind, that goes without saying, but we're also looking into areas that don't have environmental restrictions. We don't want to interfere with protected areas. And we're also looking into areas that can be connected to the grid, either in the short term or within future plans of grid expansion, so that the power produced by those offshore wind farms can be connected to the grid and delivered to the homes and to the different cities in the country.
So what are the advantages of putting it on sea as compared to on the mountains?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because it's more complex to put it at sea. Why going offshore? There's a number of reasons for that. One important reason is that the wind resource at sea is typically stronger than onshore, but also more predictable and more constant. So with the same turbines, you can produce more power at sea than onshore. That's a big advantage because the needs for power are huge. So harnessing as much wind as possible is one of the key objectives. But it's also very important for grid stability to have as predictable and stable supply. That's one of the key advantages. But there's other advantages, especially in a country like the Philippines, which is very populated. It's quite mountainous. There's not so much land available for agriculture. Going to the sea avoids using precious land onshore. And that's an advantage that is one of the reasons for offshore wind development in quite a number of countries, both in Europe, the US, or APAC.
Yeah, so before we dive into the specifics of the projects that you're planning here in the Philippines, tell us about the projects outside of the Philippines. What have you learned so far? I mean, the company is relatively young, right? But so far in the other countries, what are your key learnings and how do you intend to apply them here in the Philippines?
So offshore wind started in the North Sea in Europe. And since roughly 20 years ago, when the first offshore wind projects were developed, the industry has advanced tremendously worldwide. So the main driver originally was to go outside visible areas on land in countries where there was opposition to onshore wind projects. But over time, costs have gone down tremendously, and the technology has proven to be a very strong driver for decarbonization in quite a number of markets, all around the North Sea, for sure. But more recently, it's been a very big driver for renewable development in countries like China, which accounts today for almost half of the total capacity worldwide, and in new markets like the US or like Taiwan. So it's becoming a very important renewable technology. It's the one which is experiencing fastest growth worldwide. And as we were commenting before, there's good reasons why the Philippines is looking into offshore wind for its future energy needs.
Yeah, so which areas are you looking at, and how soon do we get to see?
Yeah, so within the Philippines, we've looked into different areas, all of which with good wind resource, but again with good prospects for interconnection. That includes northern Luzon in Claveria. It includes Mariveles in the broader Manila Bay Area, Calatagan, and Bulalacao. These are the four projects that we are developing right now.
Yeah, quite near. I mean, it's just an hour or two drive, right? So, I mean, why those areas?
Yeah, there's good reasons for that. In the specific case of Mariveles and Calatagan, apart from the strong wind resource, is the proximity to the big load center, the main load center in the Philippines, in the broader Manila area, that is a driver for this location. And that's a big advantage compared to other sources of power, especially in renewables. We can produce closer to the load centers, and that means less infrastructure to be built for interconnection, and less losses as well in transporting the power from where the power is generated in the offshore wind farm to consumption. So all that are advantages, and it's one of the big drivers for offshore wind development in quite a number of countries, actually, not only in the Philippines.
Now, I want to hear your thoughts or comments on the paperwork so far, because lots of investors, they want to invest in the Philippines, but the problem really is the paperwork and the red tape. How's doing business so far in the Philippines, and is there a wish list for regulators, or even more importantly, the local government into doing business?
Yeah. So first thing, it's important to highlight that a lot of work has been done, and generally speaking, Philippines is perceived as one of those countries that is progressing faster in setting up the conditions for offshore wind deployment. And it's important to praise the work done by different entities within the administration in working in a coordinated way for this to happen. So, for example, it's possible in the Philippines, and that's the situation we are in at Blue Float Energy right now, to secure a seabed space to conduct site investigation, early works that eventually we will conduct to construct the wind farms. That's something which is not necessarily the case in other markets. For example, the country where we have our headquarters, Spain, doesn't yet have a regulation for this purpose. So in that sense, Philippines is definitely more advanced than Spain, for example, in setting up regulation. Does that mean that everything is down, that all the homework is completed? No, of course not. There's still quite a number of issues to be addressed. The government is already working on quite a number of them. I would say in most of them. For example, there's work done on marine spatial planning, which is basically putting order of the sea in the sea for allowing all the different activities that have to be conducted to be compatible. So that's a piece of work which is ongoing. Defining the environmental impact assessment requirements for offshore wind with the specificities of the technology taken into account is another very important aspect, which is currently under consultation, and the government is also working actively to put those conditions in place. And maybe I would like to highlight probably what we see as the main next step that needs to be defined. Again, the government is also working on that, which is defining the conditions and the timing of the tenders for allocating offtake agreements to offshore wind. This is currently being done in other technologies, in renewables like solar or onshore wind, and it's important to define similar arrangements, similar tenders for offshore wind. Having a predictable pathway on when these tenders will occur, which frequency, how much capacity will be allocated, what are going to be the requirements which are going to be asked to the developers to comply with, guarantees and so on and so forth, is very important to provide visibility to this whole industry. It's important for developers, of course, because we want to understand what is coming up, to plan our activities to be ready for those tenders, but it's also very important for industrials. One aspect I'm sure we talk about today is about the opportunity to develop a whole industrial development in the country for offshore wind with potential for big investments and job creation. Having visibility is on the development of this industry is key for those international companies, industrial companies, willing to invest in production capacity, production of foundations, of towers, of different pieces of equipment, to come to the Philippines and invest in this country.
So how much are you investing in the Philippines, and how many megawatts, how many households do you intend to power up?
Yeah, so it's important to highlight that the Philippines is benefiting from very strong growth, economic growth. The average rate in the last few years and in the foreseeable future is going to be between 6 and 8%. That's a lot compared to the international average. It's excellent news, of course, that will allow for big social development, step forward as a country. But it's at risk if we are not able to provide the power to fuel that growth. So one of the key objectives and the key challenges of the country is to develop sufficient generation capacity to keep growing as a fast-growing economy. That needs to be done in multiple ways. There needs to be solar, onshore development, gas. Some people talk about nuclear. All that is very welcome, but in our opinion is that all this cannot happen without offshore wind. How much of the total needs can be covered by offshore wind? Well, the potential is huge. That's one of the big advantages of offshore wind. There's plenty of space available. Philippines has very good wind resource, so there's quite a number of locations where offshore wind could be deployed, and it's not unthinkable to believe that offshore wind can cover anything from 10% of the total generation needs of the country up to maybe 40 or even 50% in the long run.
So 40 to 50?
It could be feasible. The potential is there, that's for sure. All the studies done by international entities show that the potential is simply huge. Now, the question is, what's the level of ambition and how to set the conditions for all that capacity, all that potential to be fully developed.
Now, actually, the Department of Energy's renewable energy power generation mix target is 35% by 2030 and has an aspirational target, quote-unquote, aspirational target of 50% by 2040. Now, your thoughts, is that feasible?
Not only feasible, I think it's needed. So it's definitely feasible, and the experience we have from other geographies is that targets that people thought initially were basically impossible happened, and it happened not just because there was a strong support for that to happen, but also because renewable technology has been evolving very fast over the last few years, and the power generated is of better quality, but also cheaper than it was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago when, for example, the offshore wind industry started. So the technology is there to meet those targets. There's quite a number of challenges, of course, but it's definitely feasible. And as I was commenting, it's needed because there's few other alternatives available if the Philippines wants to significantly increase its generation base. Coal has been decided to be phased out and not used for future economic growth, and I think it's a very bold and very good decision. sustainable development is critical. Global supply chains are required to be decarbonized more and more. International companies are requiring the suppliers to be fully decarbonized, and the only way to achieve that is through renewables. So I think those targets are definitely in the right direction, and I dare to say that in a few years' time, we will be talking about even more ambitious targets as the first ones will have been already met.
Now, the thing is, some of the CEOs, those that are in coal, the traditional, the companies that have been long powering the Philippines, is that they're basically saying that if we get rid of coal, just like that, I mean, it's literally going to be turning off the lights. I mean, what are your thoughts on that type of view? Is that really the case? If we go to renewable, energy won't be that reliable. We'll have power shortages, perhaps, or do you have a different view? I'm pretty sure you have a different view.
Yes, actually, experience from other geographies shows that it's possible to transition into a decarbonized generation base without blackouts. Now, is it easy? No, of course. It requires strong planning, and it requires that the transition happens not in an abrupt manner, but with sufficient planning and over time. So I would definitely agree that things cannot change from one day to the next. We are working for that to happen as fast as possible, but it cannot be so imminent. Having said that, it's definitely possible, and the secret is by leveraging and combining different technologies. Sometimes I'm asked about whether it's better to develop solar or offshore wind or onshore wind or nuclear, and the answer I always give is you need everything. The challenge we have in front of us of saving the world, and by the way, Philippines is one of the countries most hardly hit by climate change, so it's in our interest to move towards a decarbonized global economy fast. But the challenge is so big that you cannot afford to only cherry pick. You need to do everything at the same time. So we don't pretend that everything is covered by offshore wind, but it's definitely a very useful technology in the sense that its production, as I was commenting before, it's more stable, more predictable than other renewables. It complements quite well with solar, for example, and when you combine both, you get very close to the profile of the demand. But of course, on top of that, you will need also other type of renewables like hydro. You will probably need some type of battery storage, and during quite a few years, you will still need those coal plants to be phased out over time, and gas generation that we haven't talked about will be a good backup solution, at least during a number of years.
Now, here's a little challenge for you, because when we talk about renewables, there's always there are discussions about trade-offs. When you talk about solar, it's basically taking away some parcels of land meant for agriculture. When you do wind farms in mountains, it also has some environmental impact. For offshore wind, won't you? How do you ensure now that the marine life in the area and the area itself won't be altered in such a way that marine life will will cease to exist in that area? I mean, I think that's the main concern.
That's a very good question, because we strongly believe that the only way for this industry to prosper over time is to ensure it's a very sustainable industry, the most sustainable industry in power generation. And that's why we pay so much attention to the environmental aspects of the development of our projects. I already commented before that from the get-go we avoid sensitive areas, protected areas. We don't want to interfere with those areas where you have more and more scarce marine life. But that doesn't mean that you can simply build whatever you want outside those areas. Even in the areas we have selected, we need to conduct quite extensive surveys to characterize what's the existing marine life. Information is key. Understanding what's there is key. If you don't know what you need to protect, it's impossible to protect it. So once you have all this information, it's about analyzing the potential impacts, and ideally not just avoid exercising that impact, but in some cases we can even revert the loss of biodiversity that happened before and create more biodiversity. One of the beauties of the sea is that its capacity to regenerate is huge, and we've seen good examples of species that didn't exist for many, many years, for decades, and there were programs associated with offshore wind farms that allowed to recover some of the species that used to populate those areas. So there's ways to not only to avoid an impact or to mitigate those impacts, but even to reverse impacts that had happened before due to other activities.
Now again, help me imagine your project. How far is it from the shore? How big? I mean, help us imagine that.
It's difficult to give a perspective because even when you see things live at the sea, and it's definitely an experience to live, the fact of not having references in the sea makes it more difficult to understand the dimension of these projects.
Do you really need to go that far off? I mean, what are the determinants for you to decide that we will build here?
Yeah,
or is it the depth, or is that?
Yeah, we comment on a number of them. So avoiding protected areas, looking for the best wind locations, proximity to the grid, but there's all others that you're pointing out. So water depth is another one. There's two types of offshore wind technologies: fixed bottom, which is basically foundations that are built on the seabed. That is feasible up to 60, maybe 70 meters of water depth. When you go beyond that water depth, you need to go for floating foundations, which are basically floaters which are anchored to the seabed. Philippines would need both. There are some areas which allow for fixed bottom foundations to be used, but the vast majority of the potential in the Philippines is with floating, and that's the type of foundation in which Blue Float is a specialist. We do both, but that's where we are.
Hence the name Blue Float.
Yeah, the name comes from the fact that we are specialists in floating wind. So all these aspects are important. So proximity to the shore, it depends on the area. Sometimes we are as close as 4 or 5 kilometers. Sometimes we go further offshore. These turbines are quite big. They can be as tall with a tip of the blade as 250. The new future turbine models maybe 300 meters high. So that's very high, like a skyscraper in the business district in Greater Manila.
Oh, that's huge.
It's very big, but again, when you look at sea, it doesn't look that big because you don't have references. They are quite far away from each other. Usually you have 1 to 2 kilometers distance between one turbine and another, which allows for many of the existing activities to continue moving forward under the necessary safety precautions. So yeah, we're talking about very large investments, very large developments, but again, that's the beauty, is that in one single wind farm, you can build what will need many hectares in onshore wind or solar.
Now, so how reliable is that? Because in solar, I think Filipinos are already more familiar with that one, but the disadvantage really is the weather, right? Yep. And I think that's the same for the offshore wind. You need the wind. So now that we're basically experiencing El Nino, how's that gonna affect the offshore wind?
Well, all that is part of the studies that we conduct before construction to characterize everything, but including the wind regime. Again, the wind regime at sea is different than onshore, and it's typically more predictable and more constant than onshore. I think it's a technology that has already been proven in quite a number of countries. Technology is very advanced, and issues like typhoons, for example, earthquakes.
So what happens to typhoon if
it's
we have I think 12 to 15 typhoons in a year, right?
So the technology has evolved to to be able to withstand any type of condition. There's already offshore wind farms constructed in typhoon areas like in Taiwan or in China. So it's not new, it's something that is already well known. Of course, during a typhoon, you will have to stop the turbine, but once the storm is over, you will start again and keep producing power.
Yeah, so finally, long-term plans for the Philippines, and how soon do we see the offshore wind projects?
Yeah. So in terms of plans, we are ambitious. The current projects we are developing could fit up to 6.7 gigawatts of capacity. That's a lot. The short-term plans is to prepare ourselves to be ready for the first tenders. And in terms of timing, I think that is largely dependent on the government setting up these conditions that we were talking about before, in which it's already working. It's important to notice that as an industry, we have organized ourselves to provide support to the government in anything we can, and we can be useful in providing indication about those conditions to secure investments. And we have created an association called POWER, which stands for Philippine Offshore Wind Energy Resource Association. It groups currently 6 of the market leaders in offshore wind, but there's others applying to join. And it's an association in which Bluefloat has been deeply involved from the beginning in its creation. Actually, our country manager, who unfortunately recently passed away, Raymond Pascual, and I would like to pay tribute to his memory. He's a visionary, an amazing personal inspiration for all of us. He was the founding member and president of the association. We are lucky to count on a very strong team here in the Philippines. So it's now our colleague Mats who's going to take the lead in our team and will be at the service of this power association. But as I was commenting, we are working hard collectively to help setting the foundations for a fast development of offshore wind in the country.
Yeah, and I look forward to seeing the first offshore wind project very, very soon.
Yes, okay. I'm sure we will see that, and I think it's going to be a landmark for the Philippines. Yet another example of how fast the country is developing, and I'm sure it's going to be a reference in the region as an example to follow for other countries as well.
Yeah. Thanks so much for your time, Carlos.
Thank you.
Carlos Martin, CEO of Bluefloat Energy. Let's continue the discussion and all things about renewable energy and business. Download the Rappler Communities app on your mobile. It's available for iOS and Android. You can scan the QR codes from below. Register for an account and join the Money channel. I'm there and we can chat. Once again, I'm Ralph Rivas. This has been another episode of Business Sense. Thanks for watching.